G'day folks, it's Nathan here, or FVR375. Today I'm going to do a video around the 6.5 Creedmoor and offer a professional perspective on this cartridge and go through some of the facets of it, the good, the bad, the ugly, and then offer some thoughts and opinions from my perspective on where the cartridge fits and potential uses for hunting. And that's mainly what we're going to be talking about, is hunting / pest control in that context, more so than target shooting, because target shooting's not really my space, and obviously hunting and feral animal control certainly is. So anyway, as most of you are probably well aware, the 6.5 cartridges have taken off in recent times. The 6.5 caliber itself has been around for a long time, initially in the format of the 6.5 by 55 Swedish Mauser, which is a really good cartridge. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. And then there's a whole bunch of other stuff that's recently come out. You know, obviously we have the 6.5 Creedmoor, which we have in front of us now. And by the way, this is my Bagara HMR 6.5 Creed with a Pulsar XL60 thermal on it currently. It is unloaded with the bolt rear. And I've got some examples of 6.5 projectiles in front of that. Other 6.5s that are around the place, you know, there's 260 Remington, which is a 308 case, essentially neck down to 6.5 caliber, 6.5 Grendel, 6.5 300 Weatherby, 6.5 284, the 6.5 RPM. I've got a couple of others on the list here. The 264 Weatherby Mag, 2.6 Nosler, and one of the newest ones on the street currently is the 6.5 PRC. So within those cartridge groups, essentially there's three different categories really. There's lower powered 6.5s, there's your medium or standard cartridge 6.5s, which is where your Mauser, your Creedmoor, etc. fit, and then there's your Magnum style 6.5s, which essentially do all the same thing, they're just faster. So they do what some of the more moderate cartridges do, but at longer ranges. So they're essentially the types of offerings that are on the market now. So I'm not going to do a deep dive into what the ballistics are on every single 6.5 caliber / cartridge that is out there, but I am going to talk in detail now about the 6.5 Creedmoor. To give that discussion some context, I just want to talk to the point of you know, what my experience is with 6.5s, and I'll flick some photos up every now and again as we're going through this to break the video up and show some of the rifles that I've had in 6.5s over the years. So way back when, I think probably in the early 2000s, if not the late 90s, I got hold of my first 6.5, which is a 6.5 by 55 Swedish Mauser. Now that cartridge has been around for a long time. It has a really good reputation around the world and in Australia as well. One of the limitations of the 6.5 by 55 was that it was generally found in ex-military surplus rifles that had been cut down or modified on the Mauser 96 action. The Mauser 96 action is not quite the same as a Mauser 98 action, and the metallurgy is not quite as strong as a Mauser 98. And what that really meant was that the 6.5 by 55 Swedish Mauser was always loaded to a lower potential. So it always had capacity to do a little bit more, but from a safety perspective with factory loads, etc., it really wasn't dialed up to be what it could be. So from my perspective, I've been a hand loader for a long time, and I certainly was when I got hold of my first 6.5 by 55. And I've had rifles in Ruger 77s, Seiko Finlights, Blaser R8s, I had a CZ, what else have I had? Yeah, that'd be about it in the 6.5s, and all of those are obviously modern design sporting rifles. So therefore, the potential on a 6.5 by 55 can be dialed right up to make it a very effective medium game cartridge, and that's certainly what I did. So after quite a lot of experimenting, I ended up using these guys here, which are the 140 grain Hornady SST, which have now been essentially replaced by the ELDX load. But the 140 grain SST was a round or a projectile that I found to be the best balance of terminal performance and exterior ballistics, and it really made the 6.5 by 55 shine when loaded to its full modern potential. And I've got one of those cartridges here somewhere. So this is an example, which I don't know how well you can see that, but there is a 6.5 by 55 Swedish Mauser round, and that's loaded out with 140 grain SST on Lapua brass. So that's where I started using the 6.5s essentially. And I shot a lot of animals, both pests and game, with those over the years. All sorts of medium-sized deer, lots of pigs, plenty of foxes, wild dogs, feral cats, you name it. The 6.5 got a run. So I couldn't tell you how many rounds of 6.5 by 55 I fired over the years, but it's a hell of a lot. And it certainly gave me a really good perspective on what the moderate 6.5s can do. Now, the relevance of that bit of information and some of these photos that I'm flashing up through this video is that essentially the 6.5 by 55 in reality is the same as the 6.5 Creedmoor. So it's not the same cartridge, that's not what I'm saying, but the exterior ballistics and the terminal ballistics are very, very similar. So there's really not a lot of difference between the two. And you can extend that same comment out to the 260 Remington, which is the 308 case next down to 6.5, which is a cartridge that I have no idea why it didn't take off more. It was around well before the 6.5 Creedmoor was. And the 260 Remington is another excellent cartridge. So those 365s are really the same thing. So anything that I'm going to say about a 6.5 Creedmoor today, we can certainly extrapolate that to a modern hand-loaded 6.5 by 55 loaded on a modern rifle action, or indeed the 260 Remington, which is obviously that 308 case neck down to 6.5 calibre. So what is it about the 6.5 calibre that makes it effective on the hunting field? And we'll talk to that first, more so than the target field, despite the fact that the Creedmoor's origin was largely in the long-range precision shooting space. Essentially, the 6.5s have a number of good attributes. So I loved what the 6.5 by 55 could do with those 140 grain projectiles. They had excellent exterior ballistics, which basically meant that their wind drag was, or their drag through the air was relatively low in comparison to some of the other cartridges, and therefore their drop and drift were lower than a lot of the other cartridges that are comparable out there, and we'll talk to a couple of those a little bit later on. So what did that mean? It basically meant that even over those moderate ranges on a windy day, it was pretty easy to put your rounds on target in the right spot with a 6.5. So that's certainly a positive benefit. Another element of that is the actual terminal performance of the 6.5 projectiles. So they're not a big game capability. The 6.5, in my opinion, is probably the first projectile size from a calibre perspective where you do start to get some effective wounding and terminal performance on game. In my opinion, the 6mm are a little bit light and you can't get enough bullet weight, but at the 6.5s you certainly get to step up that bullet weight and they give some terminal performance in the right cartridges that is comparable with a lot of the other medium game cartridges out there, you know, the 270s, the 308s, etc, etc. And you know, there are some comparisons that can be made there that we're not necessarily going to do a deep dive into right here, right now, but suffice it to say that they cross boundaries in terms of the being able to be utilised for the same purposes. So from a terminal ballistics point of view, the 6.5s are adequate on medium game at moderate ranges, and we'll talk to some more of that a little bit later. So with that in mind, what I wanted to do now was to talk to really three key points about the 6.5 Creedmoor specifically that'll help people sort of understand my perspective on it and maybe shine a light on you know, some aspects of this particular cartridge. And we'll do that by breaking it down into the good, the bad and the ugly. So the good. Probably got a fair idea what I'm going to say when I'm talking about the good with the 6.5 Creedmoor. So the good is that this cartridge is widely available. There's lots of different projectiles, there's lots of different factory ammunition, there's lots of different options in this specific cartridge. It's mild to shoot, so whether you're a relatively new shooter or a very experienced shooter, doesn't really matter. The 6.5 Creedmoor is very shootable, and the reality is that you know, a milder shooting cartridge is always going to be more forgiving to shoot. And that particularly is in the case of less experienced shooters. You'll tend to do better. Issues with form in terms of your shooting style or any technical errors in terms of how you shoot will be less emphasised by using a mild cartridge like the 6.5 Creedmoor. So on the whole, the 6.5 Creedmoor tends to be quite accurate in that respect, and that's certainly a very positive attribute. In terms of that shootability question as well, so it's shootable because it has got less drop and it has got less drift. It's not faster, it's not flashy than a lot of the other cartridges out there, but the high BC of those 6.5 projectiles, and some of those BCs are absolutely ridiculous, like they're really high in comparison to other cartridges, which basically means ballistic coefficient, the ability of that round when it's travelling through the air to defeat drag from the air, is really good. So the hardest thing to judge when you're shooting is wind. And certainly having a slippery projectile through the air enhances your shooting because you have to judge the wind less, which means less error at the target end. On the terminal ballistics side of the house, as I mentioned earlier, the 6.5 Creedmoor, it has similar terminal ballistics to a lot of other medium cartridges in the right sort of range. So, you know, 6.5, 270s, the smaller 30 cals, including the 308. The performance is comparable. It's not the same. It will tend to penetrate better than a lot of those because of the sectional density of the projectiles is quite high. But when combined with the right projectile construction, that can be very effective. So the 6.5 is certainly easy to shoot and it deals with game well. Another advantage in the good category of the 6.5 is that it is very mild to shoot. It's not too harsh on barrels, and therefore if you're going to do some target shooting, some practice, some longer range stuff to practice for hunting season to make sure that your skills are up, it's certainly very good for that. And if you do want to go and shoot steel gongs out at some fairly long ranges, then as a mild shooting cartridge, it has comparable performance to some of the bigger cartridges. However, that obviously does not translate into the hunting field because of the lack of terminal ballistics at extended ranges. So just talking briefly more on exactly what I'm getting at there. So what is extended ranges, what is moderate ranges, and what are the realities of that whole discussion. So again, this is a little bit of a subjective topic, but in my opinion, moderate ranges is 0 to 300 metres or thereabouts, and anything past 300 metres on the hunting field is going to be a long range shot. And dare I say it, for most of us, me included, anything past 150 metres when you're hunting is actually quite a long shot. We all have a bit of a tendency to subscribe to having said we took shots at a longer distance than we did, but the reality is most of us on the hunting field, 0 to 150, that'll pull us up, with all of the other considerations that come from shooting in the field. So the 6.5 Creedmoor, when we're talking about moderate ranges, I'm saying that it's capable over that 0 to 300 metre range, depending on the shooter's level of experience and skill. Not necessarily for everyone, and obviously if you're inexperienced or you haven't got a lot of time behind a rifle shooting at some of those longer, moderate to intermediate ranges, then certainly you shouldn't be doing that because that's not about the cartridge, that's about you as a shooter. But the 6.5 Creedmoor certainly will perform out in that 0 to 300 metre range, very capable in that area, hunting medium game. Okay, so that's quite a few benefits there. There's lots of good things about the 6.5 Creedmoor. Move on to now is the bad. So, and you see a lot of discussion on the internet about this. I'm forever seeing videos pop up on YouTube with US guys talking about how they've bagged an elk with the 6.5 Creedmoor. And here's reality land for this particular cartridge. It is a mild cartridge. It doesn't have a massive powder column behind it. You are not getting outrageously high velocities with it. And to that end, it's generally in the 2700 to 2850 feet per second sort of range. So the energy levels of this cartridge, just in reality land, and the terminal ballistics of the type of projectiles that are on offer typically, which are in that 140 grain and slightly higher range, are not sufficient for shooting big game. And by big game, I mean those sorts of animals. So elk, in the Australian context, sandbar, although I'm sure I'm going to have some people disagree with that. But hunting is about humane and ethical killing, and humane and ethical killing requires good terminal ballistics, and good terminal ballistics happens a couple of ways. Happens by sufficient energy when you hit your target and a sufficiently well constructed projectile to get the job done. So the fact that it's slippery through the air, it's very efficient, etc., has absolutely no bearing whatsoever on how effective the 6.5 Creedmoor is on killing game. So big game is just a no for the 6.5 Creedmoor. Will it do it in the right circumstances? Yes. Does that mean it's a good idea and ethical? In my opinion, no. So, you know, there's going to be some people who are going to straight away throw up in the comments discussions about how the 6.5 or 55 Mauser has been killing moose for years, and that's a wonderful thing. But the reality is, when we're talking about that, we're talking about European countries like Sweden, Finland, etc., and we're talking about hunters who in the main were using ex-military open-sighted rifles at exceedingly close ranges, hunting with open sights often, and shooting game for the table, and that was what they had available. So the 6.5 was what they had. They didn't have a lot of other options, and when you don't have a lot of other options, you're going to use the thing that's in your hands. So, you know, and in fairness, the 6.5 caliber, when you're running some of the heavier projectiles, and I've got a couple of examples here in front. So when you've got a Lapua 160, you've got the Woodley 160s, they're quite a hard projectile. They will penetrate big game, but what you tend to find is that the killing is quite slow. So it'll take the animal a while to bleed out. There's more room for error in terms of hitting bones and gaining deviations with that projectile on the way through. So in my opinion, the whole concept of using the argument of times gone and the 6.5 by 55 shooting moose to justify the shooting of large game with a 6.5 Creedmoor is really not cricket. So there does seem to be a tendency at the moment in shooting circles, which is a nice segue into my next part, the ugly, of using smaller calibers for bigger tasks. Reality land, it's just not the go. Like there's been hundreds of years of ballistics that have occurred. People have studied everything from every single angle. Yes, projectiles have increased in quality. Construction has changed. You know, between the monolithics and all the other different bonded projectiles out there, they do perform better. But the reality is we have got lots and lots of data that says small cartridges don't kill big things very effectively. You know, and that is part of the ugly, which we'll talk to now. So the hype around the 6.5 Creedmoor is really the ugly. And hype is a great word. When this cartridge came out, it was touted to be able to do it all. And you know, people got hold of the thing. They started doing more and more with it, which is typical of any new cartridge that comes on the market. And it got its lovers and it got its haters. And I think a big part of the way the 6.5 Creedmoor was marketed was around the whole precision shooting circle, where you're shooting steel targets, steel gongs out at various ranges under timed conditions, and the 6.5 Creedmoor shone in that particular frame, essentially because it has low recoil, it's easier to shoot, it has great ballistics, and therefore it was easier to get hits on targets out at extended ranges. And that's when competing against rifles that are specifically designed to do that, like 300 Win Mags, running high PC projectiles in that 180 to 200 grain bracket, kind of do the same thing ballistically from a target perspective that a 6.5 Creedmoor does. In terms of the drop and drift are moderately similar, but you don't get the recoil when you're running a 6.5 Creedmoor. So what that turned into, and that made it a little bit ugly, which got the Creedmoor a whole bunch of haters, is that some people started to get the idea that you could use the 6.5 Creedmoor for longer range hunting. And the reality is, it just is not designed for that. So it'll get out there, you can accurately shoot at those longer ranges, but from an ethics perspective, the 6.5 Creedmoor just does not have the horsepower to be reliably killing medium or big game out at extended ranges. It's just not what it was ever designed to do. And so the issue is not the cartridge, the issue is people using it a way that is sometimes aligned with marketing, to go and hunt animals under circumstances for which it should not be used for. And obviously that had a number of failures over the years. It still has a number of failures. If you go and grab hold of any cartridge and use it for a thing it's not designed to do, it's not going to perform well. And so that's where I think a lot of the hate comes in around the 6.5 Creedmoor. in terms of people trying to make it overstep the mark, it being marketed really hard, to get the sales up, and then people trying to use it for things it wasn't meant to do. So that's the good, the bad, and the ugly. What I'll talk to now is a couple of other points around the cartridge, and answer a couple of questions which will, again, no doubt promote a little bit of discussion, but they're opinion pieces, so take it as you will. Okay, first one, is the 6.5 Creedmoor a good all-round cartridge? Yes, the 6.5 Creedmoor is a good all-round cartridge when it's used in the context for which it was intended, which is small to medium-sized game at moderate 0 to 300 metre ranges. It's an excellent choice for that particular scenario, and it will do a lot of the Australian hunting niche in that respect. So I would argue pretty comfortably that if you have a 6.5 Creedmoor, you're running appropriate ammunition, such as something like this 143 grain precision hunter with the ELDX projectile. So it's a specific round designed for hunting, not a target match round. Then the 6.5 Creedmoor can be fairly capable on the hunting field from everything from rabbits that you're plinking to predator control with foxes, cats, wild dogs. Certainly very good for removing feral pigs. And then it's good to go shooting your moderate sized deer species, and by moderate size I mean your chital, your fallow, your red, your rooster, but in my opinion that probably pulls it up in terms of capability on Australian game. Now, there'll be some people out there who want to hand load it specifically to go and do bigger things, and that's great, but for the majority of us, that's really where this cartridge sort of fits. And it is definitely a cartridge that I would recommend as being a good all-rounder, and there's a few on the Australian market which I'm not going to jump into right now, but for Australian hunting conditions, you pretty well struggle to go too far wrong with the 6.5 Creedmoor for most tasks on the hunting field or when conducting pest control under varied circumstances. So one question that is bandied around forever on the internet, is the 6.5 Creedmoor better than the 308 Winchester? That's a great question. Look, in my opinion, despite the fact that one is 6.5 caliber or 0.264 of an inch, and one is 7.62 caliber or 0.308 of an inch, they're actually pretty similar in terms of what they do over the distances they were designed to perform. So in that 0 to 300 metre bracket for hunting, that up to medium game of a larger body size, both can do the job. Both shine a little bit in certain areas, so it's going to be easier to hit your target with the 6.5 Creedmoor, basically because of its slipperier projectile and its ability to defeat, drag and drop. Whereas the 308 Winchester is probably going to have some more terminal effect given the slightly broader frontal area of the projectile and the ability to hit the target. What does that translate to if you're shooting a feral pig at 150 metres? Absolutely nothing. So, the pig is not going to really understand whether it was shot with a 6.5 Creedmoor or it was shot with a 308 Winchester. Really where the two start to differ is when you look at the extreme ends of what their performance capabilities are. So the 6.5 is going to be better for those long range shots where you might be knocking a fox at 300 metres, definitely. Your 308, it's going to be better running a heavier projectile on a bigger bodied animal at moderate ranges in heavy cover. But they'll both sort of fill the niche at either end, providing that you're using the correct ammunition. So, look, is it better? No, not necessarily. Is it an option? Yes. Would I pick a 6.5 over a 308? Yeah, I would for certain tasks. In my opinion, if I do have to shoot out a little bit further, or I'm generally in windy conditions, or I've just got more 6.5 ammo available, I'll choose a 6.5. But I wouldn't necessarily feel handicapped with the 308 either. So, in my opinion, I don't think I can actually call that one. They're not the same cartridge, not the same caliber, but their performance field overlaps quite significantly in the context of Australian hunting. So it is what it is. Pick the one that suits you best. For a newer shooter, which is the topic we're sort of going to move on to next, is the 6.5 Creedmoor a good option for a newer shooter? Yeah, it is, because On a rifle that has a little bit of weight about it, such as something like this Bergara in front of me, there is really negligible recoil with the 6.5 Creedmoor, and I would say it recoils a fair bit less than a 308 Winchester. I'm not going to quote the numbers to that, but you know, that's the reality of it. The 6.5s are running a lighter projectile at moderate velocities compared to the 308, which is typically running 150 or 165 grain projectiles at relatively similar velocities. So, you know, the physics of it all says that the 6.5 Creedmoor will be a little bit easier to shoot, and we certainly discussed that at the start of the video. I happen to think the 6.5 Creedmoor is a really good choice as a medium game centerfire cartridge for a new shooter getting into the sport, you know, for all the reasons that we've already talked about. So definitely it is something that I would recommend, and not bad at all as a all-rounder in the right context, as we've already discussed. So we've banged on about this one a little bit, but is the 6.5 Creedmoor good for big game? In my opinion, no, it's not. So there's really just no way you can get around the physics of the matter. You know, yes, it has good ballistics from an exterior ballistics point of view, but the terminal ballistics are just not sufficient to get the job done on large-bodied, heavier than 150 kilos, big game, under the types of scenarios that you're going to find in the hunting field. There are just better options out there. So if you're thinking the 6.5 Creedmoor is going to be your big game gun, you're going to go and whack some scrub bulls, knock over some brumbies, you know, whatever you need to do in that, shoot a sandbar deer, stuff of that size, there's better options out there. So pick something different. Okay, and finally, we'll get on to the last point I wanted to cover, which may or may not be of interest to anyone. But you know, what do I use the 6.5 Creedmoor for? So I've obviously got a significant range of different capabilities in terms of rifles, cartridges, etc. that I use in the field, both for work purposes, and certainly the rifle in front of us is used as a work rifle, and in the field for hunting purposes, whether I be out trophy hunting or shooting some meat for the freezer, which I do quite a lot of as well. And for me, the 6.5 Creedmoor, again, it fits in that niche we've been talking about the whole time. You know, that easy to shoot capability that is good for everything up to medium-sized game. It's not a calibre that I choose to carry on the hunting field all the time. And that's mainly because I've got a lot of different stuff in there, and I do have a bit of a penchant personally for running the larger cartridges and calibers because I like shooting those. It's a bit of a personal preference thing. What I've got set up in front of me though is where I think the 6.5 shines. So this is my Bergara HMR 6.5 Creedmoor. It's a simple bolt action. The Bergaras are basically a high quality Remington 700 clone in terms of the way the bolt works on them. They're really smooth, well set up. They've got good clearance when you've got a really big thermal on them, like this Pulsar Thermion 2 XL60. And for me, this rifle is set up running these, which is the Hornady Precision Hunter 143 grain ELDX. So they've got really good exterior ballistics and really acceptable terminal ballistics down to some lower velocities. And so what I like, or have this set up for, is the conduct of longer range pest control during night work. And as quite a few of you are probably aware, I do a fair bit of sea turtle nest predation work, and there's certain points where you simply just can't approach because of wind direction, etc. And that's where a rifle like this really comes in. So you got HD resolution on the thermal. I can engage at some of those slightly longer ranges to get the job done, and still have really good terminal ballistics at that sort of 200-250 metre range to make sure that the animal is destroyed and those beaches are protected. You know, and certainly any of those areas where you do have to use a little bit more gun because of windy conditions, etc., and I'm not using one of my lighter 22 calibers, etc., then the 6.5 Creedmoor is really a good choice. So I like the 6.5 Creedmoor. I like all of the 6.5s. I think they're a really good thing. I think that the key issue to really sum it up is that they're a great cartridge. The 6.5 Creedmoor is a great cartridge. The key issue with it is that it's been hyped up and people use it in a context and for purposes that it was never designed for. If you use this cartridge in a suitable rifle for what it was designed for, in the hunting perspective, which is that, I've said it a million times during this video, that 0 to 300 metre shooting of medium game. 6.5 Creedmoor is absolutely great. It is a really, really good cartridge. I rate it. If you're only going to have a couple of rifles, this is certainly one of the ones that I would consider putting in there. It's a very capable thing. It is annoying to see all the discussion on the internet about the issues with it, and there's just some ridiculous comparisons that go on. But you can never argue physics, and the physics of it are that 143 grain or thereabouts projectile at moderate velocities in that 27 to 2800 feet per second range is going to perform really well from 0 to 300 metres on most medium animals. So, and certainly it's going to shoot flat enough to get out there and do your predator and pest control. So really versatile, easy to shoot. There's a lot to like about it. Is it my favourite cartridge? No, not by a long shot, but we'll save that for another video. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed the diatribe. Feel free to whack some comments in there. Everyone's going to have an opinion about the 6.5 Creedmoor because it's polarising. You either love it or you hate it. Very few people sit in the middle, although I'm probably one of those. I sit in the middle a little bit. I get sick of the hype, but I like the cartridge in reality land. Anyway, hope you enjoyed watching. Look forward to the comments. Thanks.